Are buttonholes your nemesis? Keep watching and I will give you some hints and tips and hopefully you will get them perfect next time, whether it's the first time you've tried them or your 100th. Hi, my name's Sam and this is Frugalisama, where I talk about all things sewing, and today is day 17 of 100 days of sewing, and today I am going to be talking about buttonholes. But first of all, I'd just like to say thank you so much to everyone who's subscribed so far, and if you're new here, please consider subscribing, especially if you want to hear about sewing on a budget. This 100 Days of Sewing series is just to introduce people to sewing on a budget, but there's things here for people who've been sewing a long time as well, some hints and tips. I'm looking at how to do buttonholes on a sewing machine. Specifically, I've got a Handmade XL601, so that's the machine that I'm demonstrating on today. I think one-step buttonholes are pretty much similar throughout most modern machines these days anyway. Going to include a little bit of troubleshooting if you have any problems sewing buttonholes, and how to align your buttonholes onto your garment as well. So I will cut away to some video that I recorded earlier. You might notice that I swap fabric in the middle, and that's because when I came to editing this video I realised that the fabric that I was using for the Ilford jacket, which is the project that I was working on, it was a little bit too busy for you to be able to see what I was doing, so I just swapped over to a little bit of plain fabric so that you could see what I was doing, just in case you was wondering why I did that in the middle. And I also used some red thread as well so you could see what I was doing. So onto the video. Okay, so buttonholes. This is a Handmade XL601. We have the choice of 3 buttonhole styles. So you've got 24, 25 and 26. 9 times out of 10 I go for 24, and that's the one I'm going for today. 26 I would probably use perhaps in jeans or a coat. Don't think I've ever used 25. So just to change your needle position down to 24, and it actually tells you on a Handmade. It actually tells you on a Handmade what foot you need, and it's telling me that I need foot R, which is the buttonhole foot, which is this. And the buttonhole foot moves up and down to the size of the button that you want to sew. That's as big as it'll go, and then it moves in that way. And you just bob your button in there and close it up as much as you can to stop it falling out. And that gap there will tell you the size of the buttonhole that it's going to sew. So that's just a little tip there. And you attach it to your machine with this bar here. So to bob your new foot in, just place it underneath. You might have to lift your old foot a little bit, a bit awkward this position, and you put your foot down like that. You can see that it's attached. Now the bit that gets forgotten more often than not when making buttonholes is there is a guide at the back here that must go down. Hopefully you can see that. It's not the one, that's my needle threader, it's not that one, it's just behind there, and that must be behind and clicked into place. And I'm just going to see if I can give you a proper close-up of that. So it's this guide here. Got your setting right, you've got your guide down, you've got your buttonhole foot in place. So the next thing to do is do a test buttonhole, and to do that you want to make sure that you've got the same thickness as what you're using to do your real one. So there's no point testing a buttonhole, which you often see people do, on a single layer of fabric when you're probably doing at least double layer of fabric. I think in my case it's either 3 or 4 layers and interfacing as well. You need to test it on the same thickness of fabric to make sure that it's going to feed through. So I'm just going to demonstrate that next. The automatic buttonhole maker on here will start at the bottom and move up, and it always goes vertically. So if you're wanting to do horizontal buttons, you need to put your fabric in that way. If you're wanting to do vertical buttons, you need to put your fabric in that way. And bob it under there. You might need to lift it up a little bit, your foot a little bit. There's an extra, although that foot was up, if you push that lever up a bit further, it'll go up a little bit further. So drop your lever. This has got a needle down function. And you drop your needle down and then lift it back up. Pull your fabric, your thread through. Make sure all your thread's at that side. Drop it down again, and your actual garment will have your buttonholes marked. So you will need to line that up. But for this practice purpose, we're just making sure that it's going to be okay on this fabric. You drop your needle, and you can unplug this and just let it do its own thing. I'm just going to do it with a foot. I'd advise putting your speed down if you've never done one before, and that way it's not going to go mad. And just very gently. Let it feed through. So what it does is a line of stitching first, and then it comes back on itself and does a line of satin stitch, or very, very close together, zigzag stitches over the top of that line. And then it comes back down. It does a bar tack at the bottom, and then it goes back up with a line of normal stitching, bar tacks at the top, and then back down with your satin stitching, bar tack, and then it will bleed when it's finished. And that's told you that it's finished, and it finishes with the needle up. So you just need to pull that out and check that it's okay. Now that looks like a big buttonhole to me for such a small button, but it's got quite a dome on it. So I will always double check my button. I will always cut that buttonhole and double check it and make sure that it's not too big or not too small. So I'm just double checking by putting the button through buttonhole, and that's just fine. See that it's going through just fine there, and it will come through like that. Hopefully you can see that's just the right size for it. I'm just holding it in with this unpicker. So traditionally on a woman's shirt, the buttons would go to the left, which means that the buttonholes go on the right hand side. This is my right hand side. The Ilford jacket doesn't give you any directions for that because it's a unisex jacket, and it probably doesn't bother people either way. But I can guarantee you, when you try and button it up, because if you've been used to having your buttonholes on the right and suddenly on the left, you will be a little bit confused first thing in the morning when you're getting dressed. But again, it's just one of those arbitrary rules, probably come from when servants dressed people, because poor people didn't have buttons, so it was only rich people that had buttons. But it's up to you where you put them. It's just to clarify, because I always have to look it up, and it doesn't bother me from any other point of view except that confusion. Thought I'd just use a different fabric to the one that I was using so that I can demonstrate these buttonholes properly for you. It'd just be a bit clearer on a plain fabric with some brighter pens, I think. So the placket for the Ilford is 2 inches wide, which is about there. Just coming in with a quilting ruler at 1 inch just to make sure that I've got the centre line, and I'm just going to draw a line all the way down there. So hopefully you can see that. So hopefully you can see that line all the way down the centre there. This isn't sewn, I've just pressed it just to demonstrate. And then there are guidelines on the Ilford jacket of where to place the buttons. However, the buttonholes are actually horizontal. To stop gaping, I prefer them to be vertical on a shirt. So I'm going to just show you how to do that, how to do both for this demonstration. So they're all nicely aligned. This is just to demonstrate how to do it without any fancy gadgets really. So you will get your pins and fix it to the top. So I'm placing a pin where every buttonhole wants to be on here. Just working down. And that's my last one for this. Just whip off that. And then from my original test buttonhole that I did and this buttonhole foot, I can measure in between there and know how long I want these buttonholes to be, which is 1 inch. Hopefully you can see there, we've got 1 inch. And now you can use your buttonhole foot to place it in the middle and mark. There are some little notches on there, so you can line it up and mark it like that. But I just actually think it's a little bit more accurate just using this sewing gauge, it's called, and finding the 1/2 inch mark and aligning that where the pin is. And I just prefer that method. And you can see it's actually come out quite differently. And I put quite long lines along there. And that's just so you can see when you get that under your machine foot. If you just put really small lines, you can't really see where they are. It's a lot easier to align. And these friction markers just iron off. Do test your fabric before you go and do this though. So again, I'm coming in at the 1/2 inch mark, and I'm going to mark there and there, and then give myself a really long line, and I'm going to do that all the way up to the top. Like that. So you do that to the top to how many buttons you need. If you're wanting a horizontal buttonhole rather than a vertical one, if that's your preference, or depending on what you're making. So the horizontal ones, it's already marked as a horizontal one. Because we know it's 1 inch, you would just mark 1 inch to either 1/2 inch to either side, the same as you've done there from the middle. And instead of doing the lines horizontal, you do them vertical. And I would actually have that line all the way down the placket. But just doing them as long as you can just makes it a little bit easier. And obviously you're going to be having a horizontal line, so you want that line marked right across there. So your horizontal lines look like a big H, and your vertical lines look like a big I suppose. It depends on what your preference is. Right, so remembering what we did for our test bit, for our test buttonhole, making sure everything's in place. So buttonhole guide down and locked into place, stitch onto 24, and you can see my thread's above my foot here, so I'm just going to make sure it's below, pins out of the way. Just pull it through. And what we're going to do is we're doing a vertical one first, so I'm going to make sure my needle lands right to the, ever so slightly to the left of that centre line there, and then it's going to go up, it's going to do a zigzag, satin stitch zigzag all the way down, it's going to bar tack at the bottom, it's going to sew a straight line back up, bar tack at the top, and then zigzag all the way back down at the bottom, and that centre line should still be there in place. On your foot here, there is a little bit there that you can line up with that centre mark. So needle down. So I can see that my foot's lined up there with that line going all the way down, and this is why the marks are so wide, because once the fabric's under the foot, it's really quite difficult to see where those lines are, so that's why I extend them so much. And just let it do its own thing. Bob it out, and it's just perfectly between those lines, those markings there, and then you would go in and cut it. So to do a horizontal one, you would need to put your fabric in that way round, and you would do exactly the same. You should be able to clearly see these lines underneath, so you can line it up perfectly. The only thing you haven't got is a line to line it up that way, but it should still work out just fine. There you go, got a horizontal one. And if you can just remember to make sure your thread tails are pulled off to the left, both underneath and on top, it just saves them getting tangled up when you're sewing. It's not a biggie really, and 9 times out of 10 I forget to do it, but it's just one thing to remember. Okay, so hopefully you found something useful with all that. I'm just going to run through a few reasons why sometimes your machine spits out your buttonholes, and I think that's probably one of the main issues that people have. It's not so much how to do a buttonhole, it's just that when you know how to predict when your machine's going to spit out a buttonhole, then you can take steps to either prevent it or cure it afterwards. So I've included a little bit of footage of what to do if you halfway through a buttonhole and you don't want to unpick it, but you want to finish it off. So it's all very well learning how to do buttonholes, and there's probably lots of videos showing you how, but what to do when things go awry, and I find that's where we come unstuck a little bit. So more often than not, a buttonhole function will start and then it'll get stuck in the middle. So it depends on how far down your buttonhole it gets, but it's done it on a cuff here for me. It's virtually done it all, but if you can see there, hopefully you can see there, it's just skipped some stitches. Now I'm not going to pull all that out. It's madness. A button will cover it up, but the thing is, because it's skipped some stitches, it will have a weak point there, and it will probably fray. So what I'm going to do is go back in and go over that guideline. As I showed you earlier, it shows a guideline. So I'm going to go back in. I've done some testing on my machine, and you've got to put it on back onto the zigzag stitch, because that's essentially what a satin stitch is just a very small zigzag stitch. And after a bit of faffing about, I know that a length of 0.5, so a half, and a width of 2 is going to give me something similar to what we got for the buttonhole, and that's my test buttonhole there. And this is where I've tested the size of the stitching. So you're just doing it to just have a faff about with your machine. It'll be different on them all. It probably won't be perfect. I might be able to go a little bit wider there, but it's good enough for me to go back in and back over that stitch. So hopefully I can do this without my hands getting in the way. And I'm just lining up where the machine stops stitching. And I'm just going to lower my needle, and I'm hand cranking this just to make sure I'm getting it in the right place. So I can see that's all lined up there, and I'm just going to very gently, very slowly and because there's no sensor with the buttonhole sensor, your machine will be less resistant, so you just need to go as far as you need to join it up, and it won't be perfect, but it'll be perfect enough once you get that button in, because life's too short for unpicking buttonholes. I've left the thread in so you can see where I've started. That's where it stopped, and that's where I've gone down. And you can see it's been struggling, and I might go over that, I might not. Like I say, once that button's in, you're not going to be able to see it. So usually when your machine doesn't want to do a buttonhole, it's because the sensor that you put down is very, very sensitive, and oftentimes it's because you haven't trimmed inside some cuffs or neckline, and it's usually when it approaches something a little bit thicker than the rest of the fabric, or if it's coming off the end. So what I do to prevent that is to turn my work upside down, and I'm just going to show you now. So when I was marking out this Ilford jacket, I had an idea that I would have some problems with this top buttonhole. I've already sewn it because I recorded this and put it on fast, and you couldn't see. So what I did, instead of sewing it like the rest of the buttonholes from the bottom upwards and have it in that way, I turned the work around and started that way. And by having all those markings on that I'd already drawn on, all the lines on, you can align it. By turning it round, you would start you would start there. You're still starting to the left, but obviously your fabric's edge of your fabric is at that side of the machine instead of that side of the machine. And I just find that it just seems to work every time. I don't have to fight with the machine. Just oftentimes when the fabric's coming off the end like that, when it's quite close to the top like that, the sensor seems to pick up. I don't know if it's the extra thickness, the extra bulk, or what it is, but just by flipping it round, most of the fabric is on underneath the foot there, and it's coming towards the end there, and it just seems to work better that way for me. You could try, if you want it to work in the same direction, putting some more fabric underneath. I've never tried that, but what happens is if this foot's not flat, you can see what moves up and down. Your foot likes to be flat, right like that, instead of moving up and down. That might work if you're working on jeans or something like that. I do use this fray check now. It's the first. I think this is the first one I ever bought, and it's still on the go. It lasts for ages. And I do both sides of the buttonhole, and it doesn't stain, so you're okay with it because it's clear. It dries clear. And I go down all the buttonholes, leave them to dry, and then I go in and cut them. So I'm just doing that now, and I'll be back in a second. Okay, here's one that divides the sewing world. I use the seam ripper. I don't use the buttonhole chisel. I've got one. It's been stuck in the drawer. I used it once. It just doesn't work for me. So make sure you put a pin at the top and the bottom so that you don't go whizzing straight through. That's just to guard it. And you can start in the middle and go up if you like. Just take it steady. You don't have to go mad. And go down. Or alternatively, and it's what I usually do, I start at the bottom and I work up. I just find that you can get in to that corner a little bit better. Make sure you're not going over your stitches. I think that's the bit that divides people, because you can quite easily go through those stitches. And just keep going until you've done all your buttonholes. Okay, so I hope you found something of use there. Just a few important things to remember when you're doing buttonholes is make sure that you interface. I didn't mention interfacing during that because I was in midway through a make. You do need to make sure that your buttonholes and where your buttons are going to be are interfaced. And when you're working on your buttonholes, make sure that your work is kept completely flat. Anything that touches that sensor at the back will probably cause it to stop working in the middle, and that's usually one of the problems that we have. And just go slowly. You know, if you're having problems and you go slowly, turn your speed down and keep an eye on what your machine is doing, and then you can prevent it from making those knots. Until you're quite confident. You can guarantee it'll do 5 or 6 and then it will decide to stop, and it's usually because it's at the end of a project, and it's usually because the fabric's too thick. There's one little thing about the placement of buttonholes as well. I haven't got into too much depth of placement. It can be quite, not complicated, but I didn't want to go into it on this video. But one little thing that I'd mentioned and cut out of the video is when you are doing a fitted garment, you would always measure your first button across the apex, across the fullest part of your bust, if you're making something for a woman, obviously. And then you would measure your buttonholes from there. You wouldn't just follow the guidelines. But because I was making something that was quite unstructured and boxy, that wasn't really an issue on the Ilford jacket. So that's it from me today. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know below if you've got any hints and tips for making buttonholes, or if you've learnt something new today. And I will be back tomorrow. Please remember to like and subscribe, and please feel free to make any comments below for any suggestions for future videos. Thanks for watching. Bye.